the Detroit Red Wings have been one of the hottest topics of the offseason, as Yzerman in the front office has been putting in overtime to obtain pieces they believe can help them take their next step. And although they've been introducing a handful of somewhat confusing acquisitions, this time, 6 years ago, they were preparing to say farewell. After the city approved a brand new arena in 2014, they mentioned that 2017 would be the last year where the iconic Joe Louis Arena would remain intact, as following the completion of the new arena, Joe Louis would get demolished. The Red Wings and their fans would have all season to prepare a proper send-off to the iconic arena, and it was on April 4th of 2017 where they were able to do just that. The Wings' final home game versus New Jersey Devils was electric, and the stories and memories told warmed up the entire building. But there's one more story that comes from that night, one that prevented a certain player from creating history. Riley Sheahan was the Red Wings' third-line center throughout the 2016-17 season, and for that entire season, Sheahan's would be anything but lucky. Prior to the Wings' final home game at the Joe, Sheahan would net exactly 0 goals in 79 games. Going an entire year without scoring is a feat only a few players can, but never want to accomplish, and is more common with defensemen, but due to a handful of different factors. For Sheahan though, this was more than just not scoring. He was set to make NHL history. If he didn't score in this final game, he would be the only forward in NHL history to have at least 100 shots in a season and not score a goal. So headed into that night, everyone in the building was eagerly hoping the Wings could close out their time at the Joe with one final W, and Sheahan made it happen.
Spinning by the West Nielsen, got it in down low, in front of the goal, scores! There it is! It's Shea, number 80 for him, game 82 for the Red Wings.
In the final game of the year, Sheahan would finally score and tack on one more for good measure, finishing the 16-17 season with 2 goals and 11 assists. A normal looking stat line at first, but with a crazy story behind it. But before we continue, this video is sponsored by SeatGeek. The NHL season is finally almost here, and now's the perfect time to purchase tickets to watch your favorite team play live. SeatGeek is an app that allows users to purchase tickets to games, concerts, and live events. SeatGeek makes buying tickets simple as they rate them on a scale from 1 to 10, with the higher number being the better of the deals. I try and attend a Flames game almost every single year, and each year I go, I make sure to purchase my tickets using SeatGeek. If you or someone you know is trying to go to a game this season, then make sure to use my promo code IDGT at checkout so you can save $20 off your first purchase. SeatGeek has been a constant supporter of the channel, so big shout out to SeatGeek for once again sponsoring the video. With that all being said, let's go to New Year's Eve of 1978, where the LA Kings would acquire scrappy forward Randy Holt from Vancouver. Over the course of the rest of that season, Holt would take over as the primary fighter, getting involved in 11 scraps in 2 months headed into March. On March 11th, the Kings were set to take on Philadelphia, a team known for its grit, hard checks, and even harder hits. And at 14:58 in the first period, Holt would get involved in another. Both men would receive a double 5-minute major and a 10-minute game misconduct. Normally, they get sent to the dressing room due to there being less than 15 minutes remaining. But the rule wasn't established till 1980, so they just sat in the box. Both teams' Wilsons would then square off about 4 minutes later, and at that point, a fuse was lit. And after the horn sounded to end the period, chaos would erupt, as both teams began an all-out brawl. Once the massive brawl was complete, over 352 penalty minutes would be assessed to both teams, with 158 being assigned to the Kings. And of those 158 minutes, some of them would get tackled on to Randy Holt. So between the penalties taken earlier and the ones he was just assessed, Holt would finish the game and the first period with a record-setting 67 penalty minutes, being the record holder for the most penalty minutes in a single game by a single player in a single period. Holt accomplished this all within 1 period, but who compiled the most amount of penalty minutes in the least amount of time on ice? Well, perhaps Tom Sestito could qualify for that record, as he was able to do the incredible.
Nolan starts pounding it. This for the hit on Henriksen. Nolan hasn't dropped the gloves, he's just eating right hands. And it'll be Archibald not asking questions, acting first, and he'll get the only penalties out of this. I'm sorry, it was Tom Sestito. What am I? kidding myself here.
This absolute madness ended up occurring just 1 second into a shift in a game between the Kings and Canucks. Moments before Sestito and Nolan squared off, Nolan would attempt to hit Henrik Sedin. Since Sedin was one of the Canucks' star players, Sestito felt it was his right to retaliate against Nolan and stick up for his teammate. Since Nolan never fought back, however, Sestito would receive a 2-minute instigation penalty, a 10-minute instigator misconduct call, a 5-minute fighting major, and a 10-minute game misconduct, thus giving him his infamous stat line of 27 penalty minutes with 1 total second of ice time.
Let me bring you up to speed. My name is Wayne
Gretzky with his second of the night.
This next little section is what I like to call Wayne's World, as Wayne Gretzky's recorded an abundance of insane stat lines over his illustrious career. This section will cover just a handful of his most absurd ones. There's the stats that most know, which I'll briefly go over. Gretzky holds the record for the most goals and most assists in a single season by a single player, with a 92-goal season and a season where he topped 160 plus assists. And if you were to take away his all-time assists from his career stat line, he would still be the NHL's all-time point leader. You've all heard those though. There's a few that I thought were interesting that most don't mention that I wanted to bring up. The first being this post from Sportsnet that shows that Wayne had more 5-point games in his career with 85 than 0-point games with 74, which may seem like a lot, but let's look at another player. How about Mario Lemieux? Lemieux, the player most say is the second best in NHL history, had 159 0-point games. And for a more recent player, Connor McDavid, the modern Edmonton great, currently has 125 0-point games. Wayne was even incredible at a young age too, as in his final year of Adam, where he was 10 to 11 years old, in 85 games he would record 517 points. Talk about a child prodigy. Now, Gretzky's the undisputed greatest of all time, but before him, there was Joe Malone. Malone is considered to be the NHL's first ever superstar, putting up insane numbers. Now, we're not going over his famous rumored stat line from the 1917-18 season, where he supposedly had 44 goals and 0 assists. Why? Well, for a handful of reasons, but mainly due to this stat technically being incorrect. If you look on websites such as HockeyDB or this Bleacher Report article titled Pass the Puck Joe Malone, they'll state that Malone recorded those 44 goals and 0 assists. But on other websites such as Hockey Reference, it says that Malone did in fact record a few assists, 4 to be exact, making that rumor just a rumor. Now, what really makes me believe that it's false is because even the official NHL website recognizes Malone's 4 assists. So if you were wondering why, now you know. But the stat I will be mentioning is Joe Malone's crazy game, where he scored 7 goals with 3 being in the third period. If there's one thing that is factual, is that Malone had a knack for scoring goals, and this historic record would be held for over 100 years. So, you'd think an achievement like this would be rewarded with insane media coverage, right? Well, you'd be wrong, as the moment was only featured in a few newspaper articles, and if you wanted to find it, you'd have to dig deep into the sports section. Matter of fact, the Toronto Sun seemed way more interested in the low temperatures in Quebec that night, rather than the absolute beatdown by Malone. The last entry may be one of my favorites to type up, and you'll see why at the end. As mentioned, Malone was a goal scorer, and Gretzky was, and is, the greatest of them all. So, they had to have taken a boatload of shots in order to score as frequently as they did, right? Actually, shots weren't tracked the night Malone popped off, so we'll never know. So what about Gretzky? Well, the most he's scored in one game is 5 goals, and he did so 4 times, never shooting the puck more than 13 times in a game. You don't have to shoot much in order to score, it's quality over quantity, and legendary defenseman Ray Bourque proved that during a game in 1991 between the Bruins and the Quebec Nordiques. Now, if shown just the final score, it may not seem like a significant game to you at first. I mean, it ended 3-3, but Ray Bourque would give us an absurd stat line that night after recording 1 goal and 1 assist for 2 whole points. Wow. Oh, and he only shot the puck 19 times, setting the record for the most shots in one game by a player. That's pretty neat. Bork to this day holds the record, and there have been very few who have come close to matching it since, with the most recent contender being Austin Matthews last season, who shot the puck 15 times in a game versus Carolina. Now, how did Bork only manage to score once after shooting it 19 times? The odds are bizarre, especially for a player his caliber. Well, it also happened to be the same night where Nordique's goaltender Ron Tugnut would have the game of his life, making a record-setting 70 saves on 73 shots, making history of his own, thus making March 11th, 1991 a night where two crazy stat lines would occur by two completely different players.
Janney with it. Janney with Neely. Elects to go to MacLeod. Shot is high and wide. Around the boards. Janney. Brooks it to Bork. Bork. Oh, shot. Save. Rebound. Neely can't get it.